I'm Lena 32, and I used to think showing up would be enough. I just hoped for one smile, maybe a nod at my sister's big day. But they still saw me as the family's mistake. My name wasn't on the program, not even in the group photo. So when the mic slipped into my hand, I didn't flinch. They didn't expect me to come. The backyard was strung with lights, paper lanterns swaying lazily above rows of folding chairs, all pointed toward the makeshift stage where Kaylee would be honored. Future of the family, the banner read in gold letters. I stood at the edge of the lawn, heels sinking slightly into the earth, watching as guests milled around with glasses of champagne and small plates of catered finger food. No one noticed me. Meredith, my mother, floated near the buffet table in a deep blue sheath dress, laughing too brightly at something a neighbor said. Kaylee perfect. Kaylee was surrounded by college friends and extended family, all cooing over her Harvard diploma and future law firm internship. I hadn't even been told what time the party started. I only found out because Aunt Diane texted me the address that morning with a simple, "Come if you want. It's still your family, Lena." I did want to come. Not for Kaylee, not for Mom, but maybe for myself. As I crossed the lawn, Meredith's eyes flicked toward me and slid away just as quickly, like she'd seen a smudge on glass and chosen to ignore it. "There's no more seating," she said without greeting, gesturing vaguely toward the chairs. I nodded. "That's fine. I'll stand." She didn't smile, just turned and walked off her heels, clicking like punctuation. Someone handed Kaylee a microphone. The chatter died down. "We're so proud of her," Meredith beamed into the mic, standing beside her golden child. "She's everything we hoped for. Applause, cameras, toasts." I stood behind the last row of chairs. My name wasn't mentioned, not in speeches, not in introductions. I wasn't even in the printed program Diane discreetly passed to me with an apologetic squeeze of the hand. It was like I didn't exist. But I smiled, just a little. Because I remembered something Kaylee said when we were 16. "You'll never belong the way I do," she whispered that summer night, just loud enough for me to hear, as our parents praised her SAT scores over dinner. That line had echoed inside me for over a decade, so soft but so sharp. Tonight it was louder than the music. A child ran past me with a balloon, his laughter slicing through the polite hush as Meredith adjusted the mic again. "Let's raise a toast," she said, glass aloft. "To Kaylee, our pride, our future, the one who never let us down." The words weren't sharp, not overtly, but they landed like pebbles in a still pond, each ripple reaching me in the back. Diane glanced over her shoulder at me. Her brows tightened barely before smoothing back into place. Kaylee took the mic next. "I'm so grateful for my family," she said, "especially my mom, who never gave up on me even when others chose a different path. Subtle, but deliberate." No one turned to look at me. They didn't have to. I felt it anyway. It's strange how silence can be so loud when it's aimed at you. I moved toward the lemonade table just to give my hands something to do. A woman I barely recognized from the neighborhood smiled at me hesitantly, then looked away as if unsure whether acknowledging me might offend someone else. Kaylee's best friend Tara brushed past and muttered, "Didn't think you'd show." "I almost didn't," I replied calmly. She blinked, surprised at my tone. I offered no further explanation. Diane came over quietly. "There's cake in the kitchen," she said softly. "If you want to slip in and grab a piece before they bring it out." "Thanks," I said, "but I'll wait." "You don't have to." "I know." She nodded, her hand briefly grazing my elbow, warmth in a cold room. The speeches dragged on. Kaylee's professors had sent in video messages. There was a slideshow set to piano music filled with photos of Kaylee in caps and gowns, holding awards, laughing at events I wasn't invited to. One image caught my eye, a family photo at her high school graduation. I remembered that day. I was in the parking lot, watching through the window of my car. They'd told me there wasn't enough room at the dinner reservation. The photo on the screen had them all smiling, Meredith's arm around Kaylee, Dad, still alive back then, clapping her on the back. No empty space, no one missing, no one mentioned me. Now, as the last slide faded to black and polite applause trickled through the yard, I felt something loosen in my chest, not anger, not quite. Resolve. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to be seen. A breeze passed through the backyard, lifting the edges of the tablecloth and tossing a few napkins into the grass. I bent down to catch one more out of habit than concern. When I stood back up, Kaylee was posing beside a large canvas banner that read, "Congratulations, Kaylee Harvard Class of 2025. There was no banner for me when I graduated, no photos printed, no party, just a text from Meredith that said, "We're proud, but your choices complicate things." I didn't ask what that meant. Graham was talking to Kaylee now, his back turned to me, one hand casually resting on her arm. I hadn't seen him in over a year. The last time he dropped off the box of my books at Diane's porch and never said a word. He laughed at something Kaylee said. She tilted her head, smiling, polished, flawless in that way she always was, like nothing touched her unless she wanted it to. I wasn't angry, but I did feel clear. I stepped away from the refreshment table, moving slowly through the crowd like a ghost nobody bothered to see. I overheard snippets, "She's amazing, full scholarship, she's going places." And then soft, just barely, "Didn't she have a sister?" I didn't look to see who asked. I just kept walking. Diane was standing near the fence, talking with an older couple. When she caught my eye, she smiled, gently, knowingly. I nodded once. That was enough. Someone clinked a spoon to a glass, calling for silence again. Kaylee stood at the center holding a framed certificate, the gold seal glinting in the sun. Meredith stepped beside her, squeezing her shoulder. This family, she began, has always stood for excellence, for perseverance, for making the right choices even when it's hard. She looked straight ahead, but I could feel her words slicing sideways. And we support those who carry that legacy forward. I didn't flinch. A boy dropped his plastic fork. It hit the pavement with a click. My eyes locked with Kaylee's for just a second. Something flickered there, something tight. Then, in the lull that followed, someone at the far end of the yard said, "Speech, Lena." Silence. I turned my head. It was Diane. She wasn't smiling now. She was just waiting. Everyone turned, even Kaylee. I took one step forward, then another. No one moved, no one spoke. I didn't plan to say much. I didn't need to. The weight of being forgotten had already done its job. Now all I had to do was stand where they could see me, and not blink. The sun had dipped lower by the time Kaylee's speech ended, casting long shadows across the backyard. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was polite and full of pride. People clapped like they'd been rehearsing it for years, just enough to affirm her, not enough to notice the absence of someone else. I stayed near the edge of the yard by the folding chairs no one had claimed. I wasn't really part of the seating chart, no surprise there. Kaylee's name was printed on every program, every sign. Mine was missing. Again. Aunt Diane had noticed earlier. She flipped through the small white program with her brow furrowed, quietly remarking, "Not even a mention." That's odd. But when Meredith walked by, cheerful and busy directing trays of cupcakes, Diane didn't say more. Kaylee had changed into a second outfit by now, a silky navy dress, a bit more polished than the cap and gown she wore during the ceremony. She was surrounded by a small crowd of family friends laughing as she recounted an internship offer from a well-known firm in New York. "She's going to be a powerhouse," someone murmured nearby. "Not like her sister," another voice added, not even attempting to lower their volume. I didn't turn. There was no point. Instead, I walked slowly toward the food table where paper plates sat stacked and the punch was running low. I poured myself a half cup and leaned on the edge of the table. That's when I heard Meredith's voice. "Don't offer her any of the champagne," she whispered to the server. "It's only for the immediate family." The server glanced at me. I met her eyes. She flushed and looked away. I didn't move. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Behind me, Graham's laugh drifted through the air. He was in the center of the group now, retelling something about a consulting project he'd landed. Kaylee was beside him, beaming. They looked good together. Too good. At one point, Kaylee's hand brushed his arm, too comfortable, too easy. I wondered how long it had been going on. Before we ended, after Lena, someone asked. I turned. It was Diane. She looked concerned. "You okay?" I nodded, just tired. She didn't believe me, but she didn't press either, just rested a hand on my shoulder briefly and then stepped aside when Meredith approached. Meredith didn't look at me directly. She adjusted a tray of napkins, smoothed the tablecloth, then said in a clipped tone, "Could you not stand so close to the serving line? Guests might think you're working the event." I blinked once, then stepped back without a word. "Oh," she added as she turned. "Kaylee's going to open her gifts soon. Maybe stay in the back so it doesn't get confusing for the photographer." Confusing. That's what I was now, something unclear, something inconvenient. I crossed the yard and stood under the pergola near the roses. From there I could see the whole spread. Kaylee laughing as she unwrapped a monogrammed briefcase, Meredith posing with her holding the frame, Graham smiling like he belonged. A child tripped nearby and scraped her knee. She cried out, but her mother scooped her up gently, brushing dirt off her leg. The moment passed quickly, unnoticed by most. I watched the girl cling to her mother's neck, her sobs fading into quiet hiccups. That used to be me. Once. Now I was just a shadow that never quite left the frame but never fully entered it either. A few minutes later, I heard Graham's voice behind me. "I didn't know you were here." I turned slowly. He was holding a plastic cup of champagne and looked effortlessly at ease, like the man I used to know before everything got blurred. His hair was a little shorter, his blazer sharper, his confidence unchanged. "Yeah," I said. "I'm here. You look... well?" He hesitated. "It's been a while." I nodded. "Almost 2 years." He shifted, glancing back at the group. "Kaylee didn't mention you'd be coming. Kaylee doesn't mention a lot of things." He offered a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then, as if remembering where he was supposed to be, he said, "Anyway, congrats to her, right? Big moment." I didn't reply, just gave a polite smile and turned back toward the pergola. Behind me, Graham stood there for another second, then walked away. That brief interaction was enough to trigger a ripple I hadn't expected. Not pain exactly, more like recognition of what used to be mine now, clearly repurposed into someone else's life. The party continued to shift and breathe like a well-oiled machine. Kaylee moved from group to group, receiving hugs and laughter. Meredith hovered near her, never far, like a satellite orbiting a single star. I noticed how easily they kept their radius, how people formed circles around them while subtly angling their backs toward me. I wasn't wearing anything flashy. Just a simple dress, muted blue, with flat shoes and a cardigan. My hair was tied back. Nothing about me shouted for attention. And maybe that was the problem. In a world full of performance, silence made people nervous. The cake cutting was next. The table was pulled forward. A silver knife was handed to Kaylee, and Meredith stood beside her, beaming with pride. Graham hovered just behind them, too close for a coincidence. Kaylee giggled as Meredith guided her hand, mother and daughter, in perfect alignment for the cameras. I stayed at the far end of the lawn. Someone next to me whispered, "She's always been the golden one." The words weren't meant for me, but they reached me anyway. As the camera clicked, I realized I hadn't been in a single photo. Not one. When the toast began, Meredith cleared her throat and tapped her glass. "Thank you all for coming," she said, lifting her champagne flute. "Today isn't just about Kaylee graduating. It's about watching someone bloom into the woman she was always meant to be. Kaylee has never let us down, not once." She paused, smiling gently. I know her father would be proud. There it was. No mention of me, no inclusion, just that "never let us down," a line that curled like smoke and lingered where it hurt most. Around the lawn, heads nodded in agreement. Glasses clinked. Kaylee wiped a tear. I glanced at Diane across the yard. She was watching me, not them. She didn't smile, but her eyes held something firm, like she was waiting. Not for an apology, for something else. The table was reset for gifts and speeches. Kaylee took the mic, laughing about childhood stories, her dreams, her future apartment. "I remember one time," she said, giggling, "Lena tried to help me with my college essay. She practically rewrote the whole thing. She always overdoes it. I think she forgot it was my story." Laughter rippled through the crowd. I didn't laugh. Not because it hurt, but because I remembered that day. She had no idea how close she was to failing that application. I'd spent hours revising it while she went out with friends. But that part didn't make the story. I took a sip of my now warm punch and stayed quiet. Diane shifted forward as if to say something, but then leaned back. The sun was setting. A warm golden light stretched across the lawn, and for a second everything looked picture perfect. But all I could feel was the hum of exclusion, steady like background music. After the laughter faded, Kaylee passed the mic to Graham. He hesitated, then stepped forward with the practiced ease of someone used to attention. I just want to say he began eyes sweeping the crowd. Kaylee is one of the most determined, vibrant women I've ever known. I'm lucky to have her in my life. We're all lucky to be part of her journey. He glanced toward me quickly, like a reflex he couldn't suppress, then looked away. The crowd applauded, and I stood there, still invisible. A child walked past with a balloon. It brushed my arm. He smiled up at me, completely unaware of the undertow in the air. The speeches ended. Guests wandered toward the buffet, toward the gift table, toward each other. No one wandered toward me. Even Diane, who had kept a silent vigil most of the evening, was now in conversation with an older man near the hedges. I was no longer a curiosity. I had faded into the edges where everyone assumed I belonged. But I wasn't shrinking. I was watching. And I was remembering. Kaylee's words, Meredith's toast, Graham's glance, each moment like a stitch tightening something inside me, not anger, not jealousy, but a clarity that had been missing. I wasn't the problem, I was the proof that you can survive being erased and still know who you are. At one point, Meredith approached the table where I stood. "Lena," she said, her voice smooth, "I hope you understand today is about Kaylee. We didn't want distractions." I looked at her, then at her hand curled around her wine glass, perfectly manicured and steady. "I'm not a distraction," I said quietly. She blinked. "I didn't mean you meant it exactly that way." She didn't respond, just nodded like one does to a child who doesn't know better and walked away. That was the moment Diane moved. She cut across the lawn with purposeful steps, pausing briefly to whisper something to the event coordinator. Then she turned toward me. "Are you staying long?" she asked, voice even. I wasn't sure. "Well," she said, folding her arms, "don't leave just yet." Then she walked away again toward the stage, and that was when I knew something was shifting. People began gathering near the front. A new name was being added to the agenda. A final surprise speech, the coordinator called it. Diane had requested it, and I could feel it coming like thunder beneath polished marble. I didn't move, just stood there, feet planted, heart steady. The party hadn't seen the storm yet, but it would. The mic squeaked as Diane stepped onto the small stage, drawing the crowd's attention, with nothing more than her quiet presence. No dramatic music, no spotlight, just her steady walk and the soft rustle of her silk shawl in the evening breeze. "Before we close out the evening," she said, scanning the crowd, "I'd like to share a story." Kaylee, standing near the champagne tower, stiffened. Meredith's smile faded slightly, caught halfway between pleasant and unsure. "There was once a little girl who grew up in the same house as her sister," Diane continued. "But while one was praised for shining, the other was expected to stay out of the way to dim herself so the room wouldn't feel too crowded." She paused, letting the words linger. That second girl was brilliant. She loved numbers, patterns, the logic of things, but she didn't fit the family's definition of charm. So she was ignored. Not because she failed, but because she didn't bend. Murmurs began rising in the crowd. Some guests glanced around confused. Others already knew. "I watched her grow," Diane said, her voice quieter now. "I watched her leave, not because she gave up, but because she outgrew being invisible." My hands stayed folded in front of me. I didn't blink. "And tonight," Diane said, eyes locking with mine, "I invited her here. Not to sit in the back, not to be polite, but to take the stage that should have always been hers." The coordinator gestured gently. Someone rolled out a second mic stand beside Diane. I didn't move right away. People were turning now, looking toward me, their faces a blend of recognition and uncertainty, the kind reserved for moments they sense matter more than they understand. I stepped forward, Not quickly, not dramatically, just one foot in front of the other across the trimmed grass that had once felt like glass under my shoes. Kaylee looked as if she might speak, but didn't. Meredith reached for her wine glass and missed the stem, her fingers brushing the air. When I took the mic, my voice didn't shake. I didn't come here tonight to prove anything I began. I came because I was invited, and because I wanted to see my sister graduate. A few guests nodded, some whispered, but since I'm up here, I said, letting the silence build around me, I'd like to say one thing. I turned slightly toward Kaylee. Our eyes met. She didn't look away. You don't have to erase someone else to shine. I looked out at the crowd again. And legacy isn't about who gets the loudest applause. It's about who keeps showing up even when the seat they're given is at the back of the room. I stepped down. No music played, no one clapped. But no one said a word either. They simply watched. As I stepped off the platform, the air around me felt charged, not with applause but with awareness. Every eye was on me, but for once it didn't feel like scrutiny. It felt like weightlifting. Kaylee stood motionless by the dessert table. The strawberry tart she'd picked up earlier sat untouched on her plate, its edge softening in the summer air. Her eyes followed me as I returned to my seat near the far corner, the very one they'd led me to hours ago. But this time, no one looked past me. They looked at me. Meredith leaned toward Graham, whispering something under her breath. He didn't nod. He didn't react at all, just stood there, arms crossed, lips tight. He wasn't used to seeing me like this, not saying more, but saying enough. The crowd slowly began moving again. Conversations resumed in hesitant fragments. Glasses clinked. Someone coughed. But the atmosphere had shifted. One guest, a woman in a floral wrap dress I didn't recognize, passed by my table and gently tapped the wood. That was long overdue, she murmured, then continued walking without waiting for a response. I watched as Kaylee approached Diane. Their exchange was low but intense. Diane's face remained neutral, her hands folded in front of her like always. Kaylee gestured once, not angry, more confused before turning away, her shoulders drawn tight. Then, almost involuntarily, her gaze landed on me. Not a glare, not a smirk, just stillness, as if she were recalibrating. The DJ hadn't played anything since Diane first took the mic. Now he hesitated near the booth, uncertain whether it was time to resume. Meredith signaled subtly with a hand, not yet. Diane crossed the lawn and sat beside me. You didn't have to speak, she said gently. But I'm glad you did. I nodded. Me too. I always knew you'd find your moment. My eyes stayed on the horizon just beyond the event tent. It wasn't about the moment I said. It was about not disappearing anymore. Diane smiled, not wide, not performative, just real. Across the lawn, I noticed Graham staring. For a moment, it seemed like he might come over, but then he looked at Kaylee and stayed where he was. That choice said enough. A waiter brought around another tray of sparkling cider, offering me a fresh glass. I declined with a shake of the head. He nodded, understanding something deeper without asking. People were watching, but no one stared too long. No one dared. Kaylee sat back down beside Meredith, her posture slightly bent forward as if the weight of the evening had finally caught up to her. Meredith looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in presence. Like her authority didn't quite land the same way anymore. The ceremony resumed, but it wasn't the same. They announced the final toast. Kaylee stood to deliver it, her hands shaking just slightly as she lifted her glass. "Thank you all for coming," she began, "and thank you to those who've supported me along the way. Even when—" She hesitated, eyes flicking toward me. "Even when they weren't in the spotlight." A few people glanced at me. No one said a word. She raised her glass. "To new chapters." I didn't toast back, just watched. Because sometimes acknowledgement is louder than applause. After Kaylee's toast, a slow, restrained applause rippled through the crowd, polite, not warm, the kind of clapping that fills space without conviction. Then came the music, faint and uninspired, like background noise trying too hard to patch up what had already unraveled. I stayed seated. I didn't need to leave early or linger long. I just needed to leave right. Not slamming a door, not making a scene, just making sure the silence I carried said more than any microphone ever could. Diane gently placed her hand over mine. "Go when you're ready," she said. I stood slow and quiet. No dramatic scraping of the chair legs, no forced parting words. Just the weight of a decision finally carried through. I walked past the dessert table where that untouched tart still sat warm, now gloss dulled. Kaylee didn't look at me this time. She looked through her phone or pretended to. I passed Meredith. Her hand was wrapped around a half-full flute of champagne. Her grip had the slightest tremble, like she didn't quite trust herself to speak. So she didn't. And that in itself was new. Outside, the gravel crunched beneath my flats. The late afternoon sun slanted low through the trees, casting long, elegant shadows. I could hear the faint hum of the celebration continuing behind me, but I didn't look back. Near the valet stand, a couple of guests were waiting for their cars. One of them, a man in a dark gray suit I barely knew. Maybe Kaylee's former professor, gave me a small nod as I walked past. Nothing grand, nothing performative, just a nod. Acknowledgement. My ride hadn't arrived yet, so I stood by the old sycamore near the edge of the lawn. A soft breeze picked up, tugging lightly at the hem of my dress. I folded my arms, not for comfort, but for certainty. Then a voice. "Lena." I turned. Graham. He looked uncertain. Like he wasn't sure why he'd followed me out here. Maybe he didn't even realize he had. I just wanted to say he began, but I held up a hand. "You don't have to," I said. Because I already knew. Whatever words he thought might matter didn't anymore. He paused, then nodded once and turned back. That was enough. My phone buzzed. The car had arrived. I walked toward it slowly, savoring the coolness of the leather seat as I settled in. The driver asked no questions, just tapped the screen and pulled away from the curb. As the car moved, I caught a final glimpse of the house, the soft golden lights, the echo of laughter inside the lives still dancing around a story they thought they controlled. But I wasn't erased. Not anymore. I reached into my purse, pulling out the small invitation card I'd kept, the one with my name conspicuously missing. I folded it once, then again, until it fit in the side pocket. Not thrown away, just placed, because I didn't need to tear anything up to move forward. As we drove down the tree-lined road, I rested my head against the window. The sky was starting to shift into that shade of early evening lavender. Behind me, a celebration continued. Ahead, silence. But the good kind. The kind you carry with quiet strength. The kind that doesn't demand to be heard because it already has been. Some people wait their whole lives for an apology. Others stop waiting and simply live in a way that makes the silence louder than any sorry ever could. Not everyone who disappears was forgotten. Some left because they knew, when the right moment came, they wouldn't need to knock. They'd already been seen.